The manuscript there, it became my insurance policy.
You write, A Jackal is Born, about Jack Corbin. Who is he?
Well, Jack Corbin, and that's not his real name, but he's a real person. He's alive and well today, working for us in Iraq. But he is a jackal. He's an assassin. And one of the most fascinating stories, I think, it involves the Seychelles, which is a small country, an island country off the coast of Africa. And it happens to be located where Diego Garcia, one of the United States' most strategic air bases, is located. And there's a long history behind Diego Garcia. But in the late 70s, Seychelles had a president that was very friendly to us, James Manchin, and he was overthrown in a bloodless coup by Francis René, a socialist. And Francis René threatened to get us out of Diego Garcia, to expose the real facts behind the terrible things that went on to put us in Diego Garcia, and there's a lot of details that I won't get into now. In any case, I was called down to Washington to meet with a bunch of retired generals and admirals who were who were all working as economic hitmen for consulting firms, and they were prepping me to go in and corrupt Francis René and bring him around to our side. But before doing that, they wanted to find out whether he was really corruptible or not. And it was sort of interesting that one of these generals had a young protege, a young man, who, and the general had noticed that a high diplomat from Seychelles in Washington had a young wife who was not very happy. So this young man was sent in to seduce the wife and compromise her and get information from her, which is a fairly common tactic. Sex is a big thing in this game of diplomacy and economic hit people. And it's sort of an interesting story here is that one time at lunch this general came back and he said, you know, I think you economic hitmen have a much tougher job than your women counterpart, because he said now this woman, the diplomat's wife, is buying into this with the young man, but she wants to be convinced that he loves her. He said, you know, my God, you know, I'd give the keys to the Pentagon to a young lady just for some good sex. I don't need to be convinced that she loves me, but I guess that's the difference between men and women. That's what he said. Kind of interesting. Anyway, in the end, the young man did get the information from the wife, and the information was that Francis René was not corruptible. There was no point in even trying.
Well, also, Diego Garcia is very significant as a military base.
Extremely significant, and it's being used in Afghanistan and Iraq and sorties that we fly in to Africa or any part of that part of the world. In any case, I was called off the job, and a little while later, a team of assassins was sent in from South Africa, 45, 46, I can't remember the exact number, were sent in as a rugby team to bring in Christmas gifts to the children of the Seychelles. But their real job was to overthrow the government and assassinate René. At the time, I didn't know these individuals. Now I know Jack Corbin. I know him very well personally. I've met him since. Our paths crossed back then, but we didn't know each other.
What exactly did he do?
Well, the team went in, and they were apprehended at the airport. A security guard discovered a hidden weapon on one of them. A huge gun battle broke out at the Mahi airport, and these mercenaries were surrounded by perhaps 1,000 soldiers on the outside. Jack told me it was one of the few times in his life where he figured he was going to die and had time to think about it. Many times he could have died, but he just reacted quickly. And they didn't know what to do. But eventually an Air India 707 came into view and asked permission to land, and they gave it permission to land. As soon as it landed, they hijacked it, and they flew it back to Durban, South Africa. And I'm now watching this on the national news. This is now on U.S. national news, and I'm knowing that this is. I didn't know what was going to happen when I was called off the case, but now I'm seeing it unfold. And to the world, what we saw is this plane, Air India 707, flies into Durban, South Africa, surrounded by South African security guards. The men on the plane give themselves up. They're marched off. They're sent to court, and then sentenced to prison and some like execution. And that's the end of the story, as far as we know. Now that I know Jack, what actually happened was when the plane was surrounded, the security forces got on the telephone with the plane and discovered that it was their good friends, their teachers, in fact, on the plane. They worked out a deal. The men gave themselves up. They did spend 3 months in prison. They had their own wing with television, etc., and then were quietly released after 3 months. A lot of those same men, that team, a lot of them today are in Iraq working for us there, doing things that, our soldiers are forbidden from doing, and they're making very good money doing it.
Who is this man, so-called Jack Corbin, working for today in Iraq?
Well, he works for a private company in Iraq that has a contract, that comes through the Pentagon, the CIA, one of those organizations. Like so much of this work, there's a tremendous, as you've reported on this program, a tremendous number of these mercenaries there. Jack Corbin and his people are at the very top of that level. They're the extremely skilled ones who do the really delicate work. We've also got a lot of people working for Blackwater and others that, are not quite as skilled and are just out there doing kind of the grunt work, but there's all kinds at that level.
Bechtel, Bolivia, the water wars. You're based in the Bay Area, where Bechtel is based, and you're the continent you know best, South America.
Yeah, well, Bechtel was given the franchise to own and operate the water system of Cochabamba, Bolivia, the third largest city in that country. And the World Bank forced this to happen. It's so sad. When it happened, suddenly the price of water quadrupled for some people, went up by tremendous amounts. People could no longer afford water. Cochabamba is a pretty poor city. There's sections of it that are extremely poor. And so the people took to the streets. They rebelled against this. There were riots, and Bechtel dug in its heels, but eventually they threw Bechtel out of Bolivia. Bechtel then sued Bolivia for $50 million in a European court because they couldn't sue in a U.S. court because of the laws between Bolivia and the U.S. And then Evo Morales was elected president of Bolivia, and very shortly after that, Bechtel dropped its lawsuit. But it was interesting that the lawsuit was for lost profits that they hadn't been able to realize because they'd been thrown out for doing things that were so onerous to the people there.
John Perkins, what do you see as the solutions right now?
Well, Amy, this empire that we've created really has an emperor, and it's not the president of this country. The president serves, for short periods of time. But it doesn't really matter whether we have a Democrat or a Republican in the White House or running Congress. The empire goes on because it's really run by what I call the corporatocracy, which is a group of men who run our biggest corporations. This isn't a conspiracy theory. They don't need to conspire. They all know what serves their best interest. But they really are the equivalent of the emperor because they do not serve at the wish of the people. They're not democratically elected. They don't serve any limited term. They've essentially answered to no one except their own boards, and most corporate CEOs actually run their boards rather than the other way around. And they are the power behind this. And so if we want to turn this around, we have to impact them very strongly, which means that we have to change the corporations, which is their power base. And what I feel very strongly is that today corporations exist for the primary purpose of making large profits, making a few very rich people a lot richer on a quarterly basis, on a daily basis, on a very short-term basis. That shouldn't be. There's no reason for that to be. Corporations have been defined as individuals. Individuals have to be good citizens. Corporations need to be good citizens. They need to take care. Their primary goal must be to take care of their employees, their customers, and all the people around the world who provide the resources that go into making this world run, and to take care of the environments and the communities where those people live. We must get the corporations to redefine themselves. And I think it's very realistic that we can do so. Every corporate executive out there is smart enough to realize that he's running a very failed system. As an economist, as a rational person, nobody can conclude anything otherwise. If you look at the fact that less than 5% of the world's population live in the United States, and we consume more than 25% of the world's resources and create over 30% of its major pollution, you can only conclude that we've created a very flawed and failed system. This is not a model that can be sold to the Chinese or the Indians or the Africans or the Middle Easterners or the Latin Americans. We can't even continue with it ourselves. It has to change. And corporate executives know that. They're smart individuals. I believe that they want to see change. And when we have really pushed them to change, we've been extremely successful. For example, we've got them to clean up rivers that were terribly polluted in the 1970s in this country. We got them to get rid of the aerosol cans that were destroying the ozone layer. We got them to change their policies toward hiring and promoting minorities and women. We've gotten them to put seatbelts in cars and airbags against their initial resistance. We've got them to change tremendously in any specific area where we've set out to do that. Now it behooves us, we must convince them that their corporations need to be institutions to make this a better world rather than institutions that serve a few very rich people, and their goal is to make those people even richer. We need to turn this around. We must.
I want to ask one last quick question on Ecuador, and that is the death of Ecuador's defense minister, Guadalupe Lavriva, who died in a helicopter crash last year near the Manta U.S. Air Base installation. Do you know anything about that?
Well, yeah, I just came from Ecuador, and everybody's talking about it because the same thing happened to Jaime Roldos, as Minister of Defense, did before he was assassinated. And the fact that it happened next to the U.S. Air Base in Manta, and it was a freak crash, two helicopters colliding. The similarities between what happened to Jaime Roldos, people all through Ecuador are saying this was a warning to Rafael Correa, the new president of Ecuador.
We're going to have to leave it there. John Perkins, thanks for joining us. John Perkins' new book is called The Secret History of the American Empire, Economic Hitmen, Jackals, and the Truth About Global Corruption. That does it for our broadcast. You can go to That does it for our program, Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.